여기 효율적인 학습법과 자기계발 유튜버로 유명한 토마스 프랭크가 속독에 대해 얘기합니다. 그가 직접 밝힌 진짜 속도법을 듣고 여러분이 기존에 알고 있던 속도법과 비교해보세요.
Over the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at speed reading in depth. In this video, we looked at the science of how our eyes move over text and how our brains process that text. And in this video, we looked at some common speed reading techniques and showed how they're really not as effective as a lot of people want to believe they are. So the question still remains though, are there ways you can legitimately increase your reading speeds? Well, I believe that there are, and in this video, I want to give you 5 different methods that you can use to actually read faster.
기존 속도법은 문제가 있다고 지적하며 진짜 속도법 5가지를 알려준다고 합니다. 함께 보시죠.
The first method is deceptively simple and, well, maybe a little bit inconvenient. It's to simply read often, read widely, and read challenging material. I emailed a postdoctorate researcher at the University of San Diego named Elizabeth Schotter, who's done a lot of research on speed reading for this episode, and I asked her, what are the skills that help people learn to read faster? And she told me, for skilled readers who are still reading between that 200 and 400 words per minute range, they're people who have a lot of experience reading, who have a lot of command over their language and vocabulary, and who have a lot of prior background knowledge they can use to apply to whatever it is they're reading quickly. This indicates what you probably already know. Reading is a skill, and like any other skill that's worth the time to take to build, reading does take time and practice to get good at.
쉽게 말해 배경지식, 즉 기존 알고 있는 지식이 많을수록 빨리 읽을 수 있다는 겁니다. 그래서 더 많이, 더 자주 읽고 더 어려운 책에 도전하라고 제안합니다.
Now, this next method will help you if you have the same problem with reading that I have. When I'm trying to read nonfiction, I really want to know what's in the book, but I'll often find myself getting bored, or more commonly, I'll read one sentence that will send me down a mental rabbit hole of sorts, and then I'll find myself daydreaming. So to reduce the instances of boredom and daydreaming when you're reading, I have 2 different ideas for you. And the first one is to form what I call an interest link with something you're already interested in. And that's a term I completely just made up right now, but the general idea is to try to connect the thing you're reading with something that you already have a lot of interest in.
관심연결의 예시로 운동을 좋아하는 사람이 경제학 책을 읽는다고 가정하면 근육이 성장하려면 지속적인 훈련과 시간이 필요합니다. 이걸 경제 개념과 연결하면 복리와 비슷합니다. 시간이 쌓이면서 점점 더 큰 결과를 만듭니다. 라는 관점으로 비문학책을 읽으면 집중력을 유지할 수 있다고 주장합니다.
Another idea is to do a little bit of experimenting to find your optimal spot for reading. For example, this armchair is not a good spot for me to read. Whenever I read here, I find myself daydreaming all the time. And that's why I tend to do a lot of my reading outside instead.
저 또한 마찬가지로 조용한 방에서 혼자 책을 읽기보단 대중교통 이용 시 지하철이나 버스 안에서 집중이 더 잘 되곤 합니다.
Okay, so third method, and this applies mainly to textbook readings or readings where you already know the specific type of information you want to pull out of it, or at least have a general idea, and it is to pre-read before you start actually reading. And by pre-reading, I mean going through the chapter headings, the table of contents, looking at bold and formatted text throughout the chapter, and going to the end of chapter and looking at the vocabulary terms and the review questions. By doing these things beforehand, you're essentially priming your brain to notice the most important information when you're reading, and that will let you do the next method, which, and this is going to go completely against everything you probably think I've been building towards in this series, skimming.
스키밍이란 글의 주제를 찾기 위해서 빠르게 훑는 것을 의미합니다. 스캐닝은 글의 특정 정보를 찾기 위해서 빠르게 훑는 것을 의미합니다.
Even though we've established that skimming is a form of reading where your comprehension is lower, it's still an essential skill because, let's face it, the text that you're presented with in the book is way more than the text you actually need to put into your brain. Skimming is a great way to get yourself through the monstrous amount of reading you have to do to get the gist or overall idea when the actual small little details aren't quite as important to get. Now, my favorite method of skimming is one that Cal Newport came up with called pseudo-skimming, and this is basically a method where you go through your textbook reading and you skim through the paragraphs looking for the specific paragraphs that are more important than the other ones, the ones that hold main ideas, concepts, and the things you need to remember. Once you've identified one of these main paragraphs, then you can slow down and read for comprehension so you can remember what's in it. But for the rest of them, skimming will suffice. When you're pseudo-skimming, a good way to pick out those important paragraphs is to pay attention to the first and last sentences of each paragraph, because those ones will give you an idea of what the rest of the paragraph contains.
우리가 한 번에 많은 정보를 받아들이기 힘들기 때문에 빠르게 훑는 것이 중요하며, 특히 유사스키밍을 통해 중요한 문단을 찾고자 할 때 문단의 첫 문장과 마지막 문장에 집중하면 된다고 합니다.
And to close this video out, the fifth and final tip for improving your reading speed... Hang on. Should we really be talking about reading speed as the metric here, or should we look a little bit broader and be thinking about learning speed as the really important thing? I think that people who want to learn to speed read are often motivated by this desire to become the kind of person who can say, I read 3 books this week. And I think that's the wrong motivation. Reading shouldn't just be an achievement. Like, Goodreads is not an achievement list, and your bookshelf is not a trophy case. By the same token, though, the acquisition of knowledge is also something that can lead you down the wrong path, because in terms of speed reading, I think it encourages us to think of our brains like those ticket machines that take your tickets at an arcade and tell you how many bouncy balls you can get at the prize counter. Our brains don't work that way, but trying to speed read can convince us that they do, and then we're just trying to feed the tickets in faster and faster. That's not how learning works. What about really taking the time to ponder and chew on what you've learned and compare it with your worldview? I think speed readers are constantly concerned with this idea of comprehension, and even if their systems worked, comprehension isn't really the only goal here. The writer Scott Berkun put it better than I ever could.
Reading comprehension does not equal wisdom. Comprehension is for a test. Wisdom is for your life.
결국 독서에서 가장 중요한 것은 속도가 아닌 학습이라는 겁니다. 책을 얼마나 읽었느냐가 아니라 책을 읽고 얼마나 생각했느냐가 중요하다는 거죠.
So here is the final method. When you read, also take the time to do something with what you just learned. Take notes, write a summary, compare what you learned with your current view of the world, and use that information to do different things and make better decisions. All of this is going to help you more effectively encode the information, have to reread less, and essentially will increase your overall learning speed, which should be the goal.
오늘 영상 어떠셨나요? 계속해서 독서법이나 책과 관련된 콘텐츠를 만나고 싶다면 본 채널을 구독해주세요. 다음 영상에서 뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.